This is Jason Kolker, and I'm here with Robert Arber. And excuse me, I'm working on a couple beers. I'm here with Robert, who has contended with me and even shown me some insights I didn't have before about Donald Judd. He loves Judd, and I think I'm kind of coming around, certainly more than I was before. Robert, I'm going to give you some ammunition in your favor because at Chinati Weekend Day, or what was that called? Chinati Community Day, I had this kind of revelation that I hadn't had before, which is that throughout history, artists have kind of branched out to appreciate or see the art in something that maybe wasn't conventionally appreciated before. So you'll have people like Van Gogh painting guys who are picking potatoes instead of kings and queens, and you'll have Pollock noticing like paint drips, which everyone had seen for thousands of years before, but he thought there was some beauty in it. And my contention is that Judd did the same thing with geometry. He saw a beauty in shapes and the way shapes change throughout the day and the way those looks change throughout the year, and he proclaimed it to be art. So I'll start with that bow of the head to Judd. But on the other hand, I still find it's kind of arbitrary. Is his version of these, how many boxes? 100 boxes? Better than my buddy Robert Arber could do? Who knows? Well, anyway, why don't you take it from there? Tell me what you think. Hold the mic about, yay, from your head.
Well, I think it's hard to appreciate art that you're not familiar with, and I think that Judd's art is pretty unfamiliar with the majority of the people. But as time goes on, I would predict that his art and stuff like his art will become more and more familiar, and the representational art that people are more familiar with will probably become a little less important to people in general. I just got to say, to start, I knew Judd and I worked with him. I worked with him for about, I would guess about 6 years. And I'm a printer. And I did woodcuts and lithographs for him. And I got to know the guy a little bit. I mean, you can't, in that short a period of time, you can't say that you really got to know him. But I did a little bit. And I was so impressed by the guy. And he really knew what he wanted. He was very determined, but he was, one, very smart. There's no question about it. I actually have a line that I've used that people ask me what he was like, and I have said, he's the smartest guy I've ever had a cocktail with. Yeah. But I'm sitting here having...
That hurt me deeply.
I'm sitting here having a cocktail with you, so...
Did you like his stuff from square one, or did you have to do what I did, like kind of have the conversion process and... have people explain it to you and all the rest?
No, I would say that I did like it pretty. I didn't know it to the depth, of course, when I first saw it, but I certainly liked it because I like machinery. Not that his stuff is machinery, but I like stuff that is made, and I like mechanical stuff, and I like industrial stuff. So. His work sort of fit that direction.
Robert and I have talked about this at least twice before, maybe more times. And so I'm going to start off by kind of rehashing some of our points. My criticisms of him were, one, that it seemed kind of arbitrary, that you could change a few of those boxes and no one would know, or someone else could do it. Two, that he doesn't make his own stuff. He sent out, or not always, but frequently he would send out to fabricators. And three, that he does a lot or little with a lot, as opposed to like some guy on the street corner who magically with a piece of chalk produces something on a wall. And that's an extreme example. But there is generally a beloved image of the starving artist who creates something really spectacular with few means. And Judd maybe is doing the opposite of that. So you can pick those off one by one, or you can just ignore them and go to something else.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that, because his work was. I mean, he reduced things. He got it down to a term that he didn't actually care for, as minimalism. He actually used another term. But he has been called by many, many people and is considered a minimalist artist. As a matter of fact, the father of minimalism. He didn't really care for that term. He had another term that he considered what he was. So he would take it. It's as far from representational art. I mean, and he had no. He didn't care for representational art. I mean, he thought that there was no good reason to make representational art, because if you are making representational art, there is something you're representing, and why would you not rather go to the source? I mean, if you're going to if you're going to paint a sunset, why bother? Why not just look at the sunset? Is it because you can have it in your living room? Maybe. But why not photograph it? So somebody that's painting sunsets or painting trees, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it isn't what Judd was interested in. He was interested in going deeper into the basics. And you were asking about mathematics, and in fact, there was a lot of mathematics involved with his work, and essentially it was arithmetic, but the bigger part of it, it wasn't. I don't believe that it was mathematics as such, but more as the mathematics of proportion. So he was interested in taking, say, a line or a box. If it's a two-dimensional thing, it'd be a line, but a three-dimensional thing, a sculpture, and dividing it in beautiful proportions. And I think, I mean, I'm not sure of this, but I think this is probably why he liked architecture, and architecture that was already finished, that he could stand back and look at it and look at the proportions. Is that well proportioned, or is it not well proportioned?
Right. Well, I love architecture, and I'm a little tongue-tied here, because one of the reasons I love architecture is because it's more than sculpture. It's a building and has a use, and it seems like there is a physical feel and appeal to architecture that people can understand not just with their eyes. And so let me attack this from a different angle. When I saw your workshop, I thought the coolest part of your workshop was not any specific thing on the wall, but just the whole space in general. You had these tables that were very kind of like humanly connected. You had a few motorcycles hanging around. You had some presses, all kinds of things. And that seemed kind of aesthetically beautiful to me, much more than any kind of dryness of shape or something, because it very much, even while the proportions were noticed, it was very much proportions for a human to appreciate, for a human to live in, for a human to work in, and for a human to absorb and take home with him. And I feel there's a kind of coldness in Judd's stuff. It's got edges, you look at it, and you leave it there, and you go home, and that's it.
Well, I got to say, I feel just the opposite. Well, first I have to thank you for appreciating my space. And I'll talk about that in a minute. I think that if you're not if you are, I should do it in the positive. If you are an aware person, your entire life will be, you will control your life, or you'll control your environment. Probably is a better term, not your life, but your environment, in a beautiful aesthetic way. Now, to me, it's very comfortable when I can, since I work alone, yes, I have these tables, and I have a couple of motorcycles, because I think that the motorcycles are really beautiful objects.
And actually, we should note that he doesn't have off-the-shelf 2010 motorcycles. Your bikes are generally bikes you've fixed up. They're older, yeah. And their proportions are kind of beautiful. I mean, well, they have thin waists and big engines.
Well,
Did I say more?
Yeah, no, that's really true, and it's possibly why about 8 years ago or so, the Guggenheim Museum did a show on motorcycles. It was very controversial. Some people felt that it was wrong because that motorcycles shouldn't be in an art museum. But it was interesting. The title of the show was, let me see if I can get this right, the art of the motorcycle. And it wasn't that, and it wasn't the opposite. The title was not "Motorcycles Are Art." It was
interesting.
It was, and I went to the show. Actually, I went a couple of times, and those objects. I mean, I'm not going to say they're sculpture by any means, but they're beautiful. You can just look at it, and I have quite a few bikes, and the reason I have them, I was going to say one I've got because it's really, really fast, but that's one of the prettiest bikes I've got.
Which one is that?
It's an Italian bike called an MV Agusta. But anyways, the living space thing that you talked about, I think is really interesting because I've been a printer, a collaborator for almost 40 years. And I've had a great privilege to go into the spaces of these really special people, like Judd, like Bruce Nauman, and just sort of see how they live. And it's real interesting. And you talked about the coldness of Judd's work, which I heartily disagree with. I don't think it's cold at all. I mean, to me, there's nothing cold about it. I think, there are things, not Judd's, but there are things that are cold. I think you could have a representational painting that is really cold. I mean, it has no heart, it has no soul. Right. But his work, to me, represents beauty. And, I mean, for me, again, it's like somebody could look at another motorcycle and say, well, what's a big deal? That's nothing special. But to me, I can look at it and believe that it is a really beautiful thing. And what makes it beautiful is probably proportions and many, many things about it. So the idea, and it's certainly you saying that people say or you think his work is cold. I mean, it's been written about that people feel that it's cold. I feel completely the opposite. It thrills me. I walk into those artillery sheds and I get a real thrill. Now, I could walk into a show of representational art and just be so turned off, and I feel is really cold art.
Right. Well, okay, first off, we should say, in case there's anyone out there who doesn't know, Judd is like the patron saint artist of this town, of Marfa. And so probably if we walked into a museum of representational art, we'd agree on a whole lot of the stuff that wasn't good. And Judd happens to be on the charts here. That's why we're talking about him. So he is of a genre of non-representational art. He's kind of at the top of his game. How do you react to the bit about me saying, well, he kind of sent out for others? He in case the listener doesn't know, Judd would do pretty big boxes and shapes and so forth out of different materials, and he wouldn't kind of hang out in his garage with a hammer and put them all together. He'd send out to folks, including people like Robert here, with really exacting specifications, and they would send the stuff back to him. But nonetheless, it's a little bit different than the idea of artists as craftsmen.
Well, sure, it is different, and his art is different. And you just think of like there are the 100 aluminum pieces that we were talking about earlier in two gigantic football field-sized buildings. And then out the windows, down in the field below it, are concrete pieces that are, I don't know the dimensions, but I'll just guess that they're about 10 feet tall and maybe 30 feet long. And
how many of them are there?
I think I'm sorry, I don't know, but I think there are 57. But I should check that. Okay, so the point is, these things had to have been made in an industrial system. I mean, Judd in his garage couldn't pour the concrete, couldn't make the forms. It was just physically impossible. And likewise with the aluminum pieces, they are so precise. They're made by they were made by a company called Lippincott in Connecticut, who somehow there was also connection with Switzerland, I believe, or the material came from Switzerland, although I'm not sure about that. But Lippincott is the company that actually Judd worked with to make them. And, I mean, without even knowing what went into getting them to the point they are now, there is such... for me, such beauty, and I lived out on the foundation grounds for a few months, and to see them in all the different lights, in the morning light, evening light, actually twice, I saw them in moonlight, and they're just absolutely gorgeous because the way he designed the pieces were specifically in buildings that existed. These two huge buildings.
We're talking about the aluminum boxes.
Yes.
Did he see the building and say, I'm going to make something site-specific, or did he have this idea for aluminum boxes in his head for years and years and finally found a big enough place to put them in?
Well, before that, I can't answer that because I don't really know. But he previous to those boxes, he did other boxes. He is quite well known for these pieces called stacks, which are boxes that are stacked on a vertical wall, and they're I've seen them where there are like 15 of them, and they're fairly large. Maybe they're all metric measurements, but I'll say they're 2 feet across, and then maybe 6 inches or 8 inches tall, and then they're mounted to the wall, and they're mounted in these progressively in stacks. They're all the same, but they're in this stack, so that repeated object becomes one object. So there's like, say, 15 of them. They're not 15 individual objects. It makes up a final project. So did he know? I'm guessing, this is going to be a guess, that he saw those buildings and said, first, I want those buildings. And then once he had them, or had use of them, because he himself did not buy them, it was a foundation that bought them, he then set about to solve the problem of what to put in there.
The Chinati Foundation and the Judd Foundation existed while he was alive?
No.
So
I take that back. The Chinati did. The Judd did not.
And the Chinati Foundation is the one who bought those barrack buildings?
It was a foundation called the Dia Foundation. Bought them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Dia. So I met a girl with that name. Well, that's not for this podcast. Okay. Now, you said he didn't like the name minimalist, and
right.
That's interesting to me because I thought his stuff was exceptionally non-minimalist because it takes up a lot of space, it takes up a lot of iterations, it takes up a lot of material, all that kind of stuff. So I'm actually a little happier to know that he didn't like minimalist, but
he didn't like the term.
Well, he didn't like the term,
yeah.
But there is stuff in the Judd industrial complex, so to speak, that does strike me as almost a put-on of minimalism. And so we're getting off track here because it's not Judd, but maybe you can help me out. The canvases with kind of a line on them, or stuff that just seems to be almost very, very self-consciously made to use as little as possible and call it art.
Yeah, but those canvases, if I'm believing what's the ones you're talking about, those were done in like the 1960s. So he started as a painter, and he painted on canvas for many years. I mean, he progressed. I mean, when he got out of school, like all of us, and then he was a painter. And then he started attaching things and cutting, not cutting the paintings, but attaching things to it. And that at some point, and I'm again going to guess here, or I would guess in the late 70s, or, well, I should know this, but I don't. He decided that he didn't want to paint, that he wanted to make sculpture, pure sculpture.
Yeah.
So the stuff that he did, I don't think it was a takeoff on minimalism, his paintings. It was just early. It's what he did early, and hopefully everybody will progress. I mean, and they don't. I mean, you'll see a painter that's painting the same damn thing they're painted 15 years ago, and I mean, I don't. What are you doing? Perfecting it? I don't. I don't think that is true. I mean, to me, that person is not a thinking, creative. I mean, it's avant-garde. Isn't that term? You got to be on the edge. Isn't the translation of avant-garde?
I'm not going to defend someone who kind of, in my opinion, stagnates like that, but I'll give you the explanation they would give. They would say they have something in their head and they're trying to capture it, and they can't move on until they do. In fact, as I say, I'm not necessarily backing that, because one of the things I love about the artists in whatever medium, music or whatever that I like, is how skillful they are at just like getting what's in the first thing in their head and moving on. And that's something that the average Joe can't do, and that's why it's so cool to me.
Well, like in music, I mean, you can hear an early John Cage music and then a later John Cage, and there's quite a span of differences, and I would hope that to be true. I mean, if an early John Cage sound like a late John Cage,
what's the point?
Or what's the point? Yeah.
Can you think of any analogous music or cooking or movies or architecture to, for example, the silver boxes or the concrete squares?
Well, I know a little bit about what Judd liked, and I don't know if you're going to take a look at a Judd aluminum sculpture and say, well, that's like a Mies van der Rohe or something. I think that would be a poor thing to do, because they're two different medias. They're two different. But Judd was influenced by other artists. There's no doubt about that. So architecturally, I'm sure that he had an affinity to Mies van der Rohe or Corbusier or maybe even to some degree Frank Lloyd Wright. I'm not sure of that, but I mean, if you're out in the world, you are hopefully aware, and you're seeing, and you're being influenced by stuff.
Yeah. But what I don't know if I was. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that. But I mean, in his personal environment, in his home, where he lived here in Marfa, it's not clean, and you would think, you would definitely, if you walked in and didn't know who lived there, you would not say some minimalist lived here, and it's rather chaotic. And he collected lots and lots of stuff, from Native American things to rocks and cactus and all sorts of stuff. So it's not, you wouldn't walk into his living environment and say, wow, this guy is a minimalist, because it isn't the case. It's not how he lived.
Two questions then. Did he like Jackson Pollock, who to me is almost the opposite, except for that his stuff is not representational, but it's chaotic. It's something he does like very conspicuously with his hands and stuff. And the second one is, do you know if he liked Warhol, who kind of, I don't know if Warhol started it, but he popularized the idea of a factory to make art and multiples to kind of demonstrate slight differences and stuff, and images that were found as opposed to necessarily created?
I don't know about Warhol, because I think Warhol was a little bit later, and I think they were contemporaries for sure, but and did he like Warhol? I really don't know, but I do know that he absolutely loved Pollock, and maybe it's a surprise.
Yeah, it is to me.
But I would say he liked him for a lot of reasons. One, it is not very little to do with the drips as such. It is the fact that he worked big. Mm-hmm. He worked in a whole thing. I mean, those paintings are surely made up of drips, but they are indeed a whole field, a whole thing. I think he liked him because he was an innovator. I mean, nobody had worked like Pollock did previous to that.
I just want to go back to the connection I made before. Everyone who's ever painted has dripped paint and has probably cleaned it up and said, oh gosh, I got to get to work now. And it reminds me of, I think electric guitars were invented in the 1920s, and probably from the 1930s onward, if you held them the wrong way, they'd feed back in an amp. and people said, "Oh, this is a mistake. We can't have this." Or you could overload them, basically turn up all the volumes and stuff, and it sounds not just louder but different. And it took decades. It's kind of strange that it took so long before someone said, "But wait, that's a sound I can use.
Sure.
That's not a sound to be avoided."
Sure.
And so, one thing that I do appreciate about Donald Judd and Jackson, how do you say his name? Pollock?
Pollock, yeah.
Jackson Pollock, is that they saw something that everyone else had seen, but they saw with the eye that there's something here. This isn't trash. This is beauty. Or this is, even if it wasn't trash, people would walk by it. So anyway, I do appreciate that
I mean, Pollock, what he did wasn't accidental. So when you drip a painting, that's accidental. But Pollock did it. I mean, was this drip over here versus the drip over there totally intentional? Probably not. He didn't say, I want to put a drip here and I want to put a drip here. But as he built that painting, he knew what he was doing. And
you can say that about conversation as well. I mean, we don't plan out our words. In fact, we don't even think about them in advance. But we kind of steer the conversation to our thoughts. And kind of what those artists were doing. Hey, we can talk as long as we want, but if we were going to go to 30 minutes, there's something I want to touch upon, which is that this town is, in some aspects, a kind of a Donald Judd work in and of itself. And if you come here, it's got these really wide streets. It's got these buildings that have very austere lines. And there are also a bunch of buildings that are completely empty, that are owned by one of Judd's foundations. What's the deal? What's that all about?
I don't think there are any that are empty.
There's one right next to me. I live right by the tumbleweed, or above the tumbleweed, and there's a supermarket right next to me that seems to be totally empty.
You've got to go inside.
Should I just break in, or will someone let me in?
I don't know. That's his studio, one of his studios, and it's actually full of stuff. And there was a lot of sculptures in there, and no, it's not empty by any means. It's got tables.
Is
it's
it
got
used?
Well, when he died, before he died, certainly it was being used. I met with him in that building, in the Safeway building.
Well, clarify for me then. So it was not Judd's intention to have austerely formed and maintained buildings that were unused. That was not some master plan of his?
No, I would say not.
Well, where does that come from then? I mean,
Came from you.
Well, but there seem to be lots of buildings that are just completely unused.
I don't think there's any that are unused.
So
even when he was alive, there may have been a short period of time that he bought a building in that period of time until he could move in. But every building, and what was interesting is the various buildings had various uses. Like what is the Judd Foundation building on the corner of El Paso and Highland. It's the Judd Foundation office. Is still, I think, called the Print Building. And his intention was, that was not an office originally. The office was over by the post office, his office while he was alive. That building was known as the Print Building, and his intention on the second floor. It's an old hotel, and it's one of those classic old hotels that has probably 10 rooms on the second floor and the bathroom down at the end of the hall. And each of the rooms, his intention was to put a different period of his printmaking career, and he did prints his entire life, throughout his career, from as a student in school, all the way to like a year before he died, or even right up to when he died.
Was he a wealthy guy when he came to Marfa, or just wealthy enough to buy a town or buildings in a town that it was kind of depressed?
I don't think he was ever wealthy, really.
Oh.
Certainly.
You heard it here first.
Huh? Well, no. I mean, I know when he died, he had a lot of assets. Wealthy. That's a tough word. Well, it's not such a tough word, but it's a word that with a lot of meanings. He didn't. When he died, there wasn't a lot of cash.
Right.
There were a lot of assets, building-wise, and ranches,
and of course his art, yes.
But when he came here, I think originally maybe in the 70s, and he rented a house in Salsipuedes.
I didn't know that.
And he had his children. He has 2 children, and he lived out there with his wife. And I don't know for sure what he was doing right then, but he was just in love with the Southwest and the purity of it. I mean, the cleanliness and the just the gorgeousness, like you like and I like, of the Southwest or this area.
Here are 2 questions from out of nowhere. What do you think of the Prada store?
It makes me laugh. I stop there. I think it's funny. I don't. It doesn't offend me.
Okay. Well, it doesn't offend. That's a strong compliment, I suppose. My second question, and I'll give you the preamble for it, so it doesn't just seem to be totally crazy, but when you come here from Los Angeles, which is what I've done, you notice that the prices aren't that much different, but there's just much less temptation. You're not going to a movie or to a pharmacy or what have you. And in 1968, in the May uprisings in Paris, it was just a kind of unfocused but colossal demonstration against the government. Like, they had a strike of 11 million people, and it died out without creating too much change. But they didn't have any written manifestos or anything. They had a lot of graffiti, and one of the graffitis on the walls during that month was, "The more you consume, the less you live." And living here in Marfa, I'm beginning to think there's some truth to that. Does that mean anything to you, being a long-time Southwesterner in Marfa? Okay.
The more you consume, the less you live. Wow, that's worth a couple more beers to think about.